Lewis was born into a situation that has no real equivalent in ordinary life. His great-grandmother was the Queen of England. His grandfather is king. His father will be king. And Lewis himself, third in line at birth and now fourth, following the arrival of Prince Archie in the family structure, will almost certainly live his entire life in proximity to the throne without ever occupying it. That is a particular kind of position, and the question of how you raise a child inside it, how you give a boy a genuine sense of himself before the institution has a chance to define him for everyone else first, is one that Catherine has been working on since before he was born. She has not spoken about it in those terms directly. She rarely speaks about her children in any detail that goes beyond the warm generalities that every royal parent offers when the cameras are close and the questions are about family. But what she has done across the 7 years of Louis's life is observable in a different way. It is observable in the choices she and William have made about where the children go to school, how they spend their time, what they are allowed to experience and what they are deliberately kept from, and in the handful of moments when Lewis himself has appeared in public and revealed something of the person he is becoming. The Jubilee balcony appearance in 2022, when a very young Louis made faces at the aircraft overhead and covered his ears and grinned at his mother with the uninhibited energy of a child who has not yet learned to manage his expressions for a watching world, was one of those moments. It struck a particular chord with the public, not because it was staged or calculated, but because it was plainly not. A child of 6 standing on a palace balcony in front of a crowd of thousands and a global television audience of millions, behaving like an actual 6-year-old. That quality, the ordinariness of it, the evidence that behind the formal occasion there was simply a boy being a boy, is not accidental. It is the product of a deliberate parenting orientation that Catherine has been consistent about in every way that is visible from outside the family. Understanding that orientation requires understanding something about where Catherine came from and what she decided, presumably not in a single moment, but over years of watching the institution and thinking about what it costs the people inside it that she wanted to do differently. She grew up in Berkshire, the eldest child of Michael and Carol Middleton, who had built a successful party supply business from a business they started when Catherine was a child. The family was prosperous but not aristocratic. Catherine attended Marlborough College as a boarding student, which placed her in a world of considerable social privilege, but her home life, by every account that has come from people who knew the family, was one where warmth and ordinary family presence were not in short supply. Carol Middleton has been described by those who know her as a mother who was genuinely engaged with her children's daily lives, who was present in the practical and emotional senses that matter most to young children, and who created a household where being together as a family was a genuine priority rather than something managed around the schedule. This is not an irrelevant background detail. It is, by the account of people who have followed Catherine's transition into royal life and observed how she has shaped her own family within it, the most important thing about her preparation for the role she now holds. She arrived at the royal family not as someone who had grown up learning to maintain the distance and reserve that the institution expects, but as someone who had been raised in an environment where ordinary family life was experienced as genuinely good rather than as something to be surpassed or grown out of. That disposition has shaped every decision she and William have made about how their children are raised. The decision to send the children to school at Thomas's Battersea and later to move to Windsor and enroll them at Lambrook School was not made because those were the most prestigious options available. They were chosen because they were schools where the children could be among other children from a range of backgrounds, where they would not be surrounded exclusively by the children of the very wealthy or the very connected, and where the expectation was that they would do the ordinary work of getting on with other children and managing themselves without the buffer of royal status, making that easier than it should be. William has spoken about wanting his children to go to state schools at some point in their education, a statement that has generated a good deal of press commentary, some of it skeptical about whether the intention will be followed through. Whether it is or not, the direction of the thinking is consistent with what Catherine's own background suggests she values. For Louis specifically, the question of what childhood actually gives him is more pointed than it is for his older siblings. George, as heir after William, has a defined role waiting for him. The weight of that is considerable, but it is also a kind of organizing frame that tells you something about what you are being prepared for. Charlotte, as the second child and only daughter, occupies a position that carries its own particular quality, its own visibility within the family and outside it. Louis is the youngest, the one who will grow up watching his brother and sister move toward roles that will never quite be his, who will need to find his own relationship to an institution he belongs to, but does not, in any formal sense, serve in the way the others will. Catherine appears to be thinking carefully about this. The evidence is indirect, because the children's lives are genuinely private in a way that the lives of previous generations of royal children were not, and the palace does not offer the kind of regular commentary on parenting decisions that would make any of this easy to confirm from outside. But what can be observed is the texture of Louis's public appearances. A child who laughs when something is funny and says so with his face, who does not appear to be managing a performance, who gives every impression of someone whose mother has not spent his early years teaching him that the cameras are watching and that he should behave accordingly. That is not nothing. It is, in fact, considerably harder to achieve than it looks, given the circumstances. Royal children have historically been visible in a specific way from very early in their lives. Visible in the sense of being present at formal occasions and expected to conduct themselves with the composure those occasions require. The photographs of Charles as a small boy at formal events, standing beside his parents in the restrained posture of a child who has been told repeatedly that this is how you do it, tell you something about the emotional grammar of that upbringing. The photographs of William and Harry from their own childhoods are more varied, because Diana's influence was pulling in a different direction. And the photographs of Louis at the Jubilee, at Wimbledon, on the palace balcony for various occasions, show a child who is still finding his way in the world in the unguarded way that children find their way, without the sense of something already managed about him. What Catherine does with him when the cameras are not present is, by definition, not available to the outside observer. But the consistency of what is visible when he is in public suggests a child who spends most of his time not being prepared for public appearances, but simply being a child, and who therefore arrives at those appearances as himself, rather than as a carefully maintained performance of himself. The outdoor dimension of how the children are raised is something Catherine has spoken about more directly than most things related to her parenting. Her work with the Royal Foundation Center for Early Childhood has involved her in research and public discussion about the importance of outdoor experience for young children's development, about the difference between a childhood spent mostly indoors in managed, structured environments, and one that includes regular, unstructured time in natural settings. This is a professional and public position she has taken, not simply a personal preference kept inside the family. But it is clearly also a personal preference, and the evidence from the family's life at Adelaide Cottage in Windsor and previously at Anmer Hall in Norfolk is that time outdoors, in ordinary natural settings, is a genuine part of how the children spend their days rather than an occasional treat. Louis appears to be the child in whom that disposition is most visibly alive. The images that have emerged from the various family photographs that Catherine takes herself, photographs released for birthdays, and other occasions with the explicit intention of giving the public something genuine rather than a formal portrait session, consistently show a child in motion, frequently outdoors, frequently in the kind of concentrated engagement with the immediate physical world that young children fall into when they are genuinely absorbed and not performing. He is very often grubby. He is often mid-gesture. He looks in those photographs like a child who has been running around. That is Catherine's work, not just in the literal sense of taking the photographs, though she does take them, and has spoken about her interest in photography as something she has practiced seriously since she was at university, but in the larger sense of having built a family environment where a child can be that way, where the youngest of 3 children, in one of the most observed families in the world, can still have days that are primarily about mud and whatever is interesting in the garden rather than about the role he was born into. The health events of 2024 complicated this. Catherine's cancer diagnosis, which she disclosed publicly in March of that year, and the treatment that followed it through the spring and summer, created a period of significant disruption to the family life she had worked to build. She withdrew almost entirely from public duties while she was in treatment, and the period before her disclosure was one of considerable public speculation about her absence. Speculation that generated the kind of press attention that the family had been working for years to keep at a distance from the children's daily lives. The question of how much George, Charlotte, and Louis understood about what was happening to their mother and what they were told and when is not one that the family has addressed publicly in any detail, which is exactly the right choice. It is a private thing, the most private kind of thing, and the family's management of it as a private thing while dealing with the public pressure that surrounded it was observed by people who follow the monarchy as a considerable exercise in exactly the kind of quiet determination that Catherine has consistently demonstrated across her years in the public eye. She returned to public duties gradually through the latter part of 2024, and by the time of the Christmas appearances at Sandringham that year, she was present and visibly herself. Her appearance at Wimbledon in the summer of 2024, the first major public event after her treatment, was one that those who were in the crowd described as emotional in a way that formal royal occasions do not usually produce. The warmth of the public response was not just the warmth that attaches to a familiar figure returning after an absence. It was something more specifically directed at what she had been through and the way she had handled it, which is to say, with the same kind of directness and lack of performative composure that has characterized her at her best across her years in the role. What Louis experienced of all of this is his own to know and not the public's. But what he experienced of his mother in that period, of watching the person who is most central to his daily life navigate something serious with a combination of honesty and composure, is part of what he is being taught, whether or not anyone in the family would describe it in those terms. Children learn from watching. They learn the things that are demonstrated far more thoroughly than the things that are explained. What Catherine demonstrated during that period was something about how you handle a very difficult thing. You are honest about it when honesty is possible. You protect the people who need protecting when protection is possible, and you keep going. That is not a royal lesson specifically. It is a human one, but the context in which Louis is learning it, the specific conditions of his family and his position, give it a particular texture. He is growing up watching 2 parents who are both in the process of figuring out what it means to carry a very public role while also living an actual private life, who are making deliberate choices about how those 2 things relate to each other and what gets protected from what. The choices they make are not always easy to execute, and the execution is not always perfect, but the direction of the choices is consistent, and it is not difficult to read from outside. The direction is, he gets to be a child first. That sounds simple. Inside the institution he was born into, it is not. The British royal family has a long history of children who were public figures before they had any clear sense of themselves, children whose early years were shaped more by duty and expectation than by the ordinary texture of childhood that most people take for granted. Charles has spoken with considerable honesty about the emotional costs of that kind of upbringing. The absence of warmth, the emphasis on composure as a primary virtue, the sense of being prepared for a role rather than simply allowed to grow into a person, these are things he has addressed in various interviews and in his own thoughtful way of discussing his past. He is not a figure who has been broken by his early years, but he is one who has been shaped by them in ways that are still visible in how he operates and how he relates to the people around him. William absorbed enough of that same history at sufficient proximity to know what he did not want to reproduce. And Catherine, arriving into the family from outside, without the particular emotional grammar of that upbringing already installed in her, had the advantage of being able to see it clearly rather than simply inside it. Together, they have made choices about their children that depart from what the institution has historically expected. And those choices have produced, in what is visible of Louis so far, a child who does not appear to have been primarily shaped by institutional expectation. The younger sibling position has its own qualities, of course, that have nothing to do with royal status. Louis will grow up in the shadow of an older brother and sister in the way that all youngest children grow up in shadows, finding the space that is already shaped by people who arrived before him, building his sense of himself partly in relation to what they are and do. George is reserved, careful, already carrying something of the quiet weight that his position will require of him for the rest of his life. Charlotte is, by the accounts of those who have observed her at public occasions, more obviously outgoing, more willing to engage directly with strangers, more comfortable in the exposed social situations that royal life regularly creates. Louis, in the photographs and the occasional public appearances, is something else again, physically energetic in the way that some children simply are, expressive in a way that suggests someone who has not yet fully learned to filter what he is feeling before it reaches his face. Whether those qualities persist as he grows, and how Catherine's parenting choices shape or protect them as the demands of his position become more real to him, is something that will take years to know. What can be said now is that the orientation she is bringing to raising him is coherent and consistent, and that it reflects something she clearly believes rather than a strategy she is implementing. She was raised in a family where being together and being ordinary were genuinely valued. She is trying to build that again, inside a situation that makes it considerably harder to do, because she appears to believe that it is what her children actually need, and not just what looks good to say they are providing. Louis does not know yet what his life will be. He is 7 years old. He knows his grandmother is the Princess of Wales, and his grandfather was a pilot, and his great-grandfather is the king, and that there is something unusual about his family, though the full weight of what that means is not something a 7-year-old can carry or should be asked to carry. What he knows more immediately is what his mother is like when she is with him, present, patient, interested in the specific things he is interested in, willing to be in the garden and on the floor and wherever the day goes. That is what she is teaching him. Not the lesson about the monarchy or the institution, or the specific responsibilities that will attach to him as he grows. Those lessons will come in their own time, and when they do, they will have something real to attach to, a person formed by more than the expectations of a role. The photographs she takes of him will be seen by millions of people. The childhood she's trying to give him is not for those millions of people. It is for him. That distinction is the thing she has understood most clearly, and it is the most important thing she's passing on. There is a version of this story that could be told entirely through what Catherine has said in public, through her speeches and the statements her office has released, and the interviews she has given on the subjects that she has chosen to speak about professionally. That version would be coherent and would contain real information, but it would miss the thing that is most interesting about what she is actually doing, which is that the most important parts of it happen in the absence of any public record at all. The deliberate privacy she maintains around the children's daily lives is not simply a security precaution, though it is that too. It is a philosophical position about what childhood is for and what it should be protected from. The press coverage that has surrounded every member of the royal family from birth has historically treated the children as public property in a way that the adults around them have not always successfully pushed back against. Diana tried, with mixed results, to create some separation between the public role her sons were born into and the private lives she wanted them to be able to have. She took them on ordinary outings, took them to places where they would encounter people who had no particular reason to treat them as exceptional, tried to give them experiences that were not filtered through the institution. The effort was genuine. The success was partial, because the press attention that attached to Diana herself made genuine privacy very difficult to maintain, and because the institution she was operating within did not always share her understanding of what the children needed. Catherine has managed this more effectively, and the reasons why are instructive. She is not the global media phenomenon that Diana was. Her fame is real, and the public interest in her family is genuine and substantial, but it does not have the same quality of feverish global intensity that Diana generated from the beginning of her marriage, and that made every aspect of her life, including her sons' lives, feel like a public event rather than a private one. Catherine has also been more consistent and more strategic about the terms on which the family engages with public attention, more willing to enforce a clear boundary between what is shared and what is not, and more careful about the occasions on which the children appear publicly and what those occasions ask of them. The result is a family that is more visible in some ways than it might seem. The photographs that Catherine releases for birthdays and special occasions, taken by her and released on the family's terms, rather than by the press in circumstances the family does not control, give the public regular access to images of the children that feel genuinely warm and real. They show children doing ordinary things in ordinary settings. They show a family that appears, from what the photographs reveal, to genuinely like spending time together. The public response to those photographs is consistently positive in a way that is notable precisely because they do not try to do very much. They are just pictures of children. The fact that they feel like pictures of real children, rather than formal portraits of small royal figures, is itself a result of the decisions Catherine has made about how to raise those children. For Louis, the youngest, this matters in a specific way. He has grown up with the least formal royal exposure of the three children. George had the full weight of global attention from the moment of his birth. The expectation of the heir landing on a child too young to know what it meant. Charlotte attracted enormous public interest as the first royal daughter in a generation. By the time Louis arrived in April 2018, the family had developed a clearer approach to managing that attention, and he has benefited from the relative protection that being the third and youngest child in a carefully managed family allows. He has had, in the period of his childhood so far, more years of genuine privacy than his older siblings had at equivalent ages, and those years are doing something to him that is visible in the person he appears to be becoming. What that person is, at 7, is still very much in formation. The qualities that are already observable, the expressiveness, the physical confidence, the apparent ease in his own skin, will change and be refined and complicated by time and experience in the way that all children's characters are changed. Some of what looks like naturalness now will become more managed as he grows and understands more about the position he holds. Some of it will prove to be genuinely durable, the product of an early formation, solid enough to hold its shape even as the external pressures increase. Which is which, and in what proportion, is something that only time will show. But the foundation that Catherine is building in these early years, the foundation of ordinary experience and ordinary expectations, and a family life that tries very hard to be genuinely a family life rather than a managed performance of one, is real. It is not a guarantee of anything. Children are not simply the product of their parents' intentions, and Louis will make his own decisions about his own life. And some of those decisions will surprise the people who thought they knew what to expect. That is true of all children, and there is no reason to suppose it will be less true of him. What it does mean is that when those decisions come, they will be made by someone who knows what his mother's attention feels like, who has been in the garden on ordinary afternoons, who has been to school and managed himself among other children in the way that children manage themselves, who has had enough of the texture of ordinary life that it does not seem alien or inaccessible to him. That grounding is what Catherine is providing. It is not dramatic. It is not the kind of thing that appears in official biographies or gets announced at formal occasions. It is just parenting, done with care and consistency, by someone who appears to have thought carefully about what her children actually need and decided to prioritize it even when the institution she belongs to might prefer something more conventional. The institution will make its own claims on Louis as he grows. It already has claims on him by virtue of his birth, claims that are real, even if they are not yet fully visible in his daily life. The question of what position he eventually occupies within the working monarchy, whether he becomes a working royal like his great-aunt Princess Anne or a private figure like Peter Phillips or Zara Tyndall, is one that is not yet decided and that will not be decided for many years. His parents will have views on it. He will eventually have views on it himself. The institution will have its own expectations, shaped by convention and by the particular needs of the monarchy at whatever moment the decision becomes real. What Catherine is giving him, in the years before any of that becomes a practical question, is the clearest possible sense of who he is before the institution has a chance to tell him who he should be. That is what she did not have in the same way, arriving as an adult into a family and an institution that immediately began to define her in terms it had ready-made. She managed it, and managed it well by most measures, but the process of finding herself inside an institution that was not built around her particular way of being required a kind of persistent effort that she would presumably not choose for her children if she can help it. She can help it most clearly with Louis, who is the youngest and the most private and the least constrained by the formal expectations of the succession. He has the most room of the three children to become himself before the role comes looking for him, and she is using that room. The photographs show a child who appears happy, not the managed happy of official occasions, the smile held for the camera and the composure maintained for the crowd. The specific, genuine happy of a child who has been running around outside and is now looking at his mother with the expression that children have when they are simply at ease with the person they are with. That expression is what she has been working toward. It is what she is teaching him, without teaching it in any formal sense, just by being present, by choosing ordinary over institutional, by giving him days that are primarily his rather than primarily the public's. He will understand what that gift was when he is old enough to understand it. For now, he is just living it, which is exactly what she intended. The watching world sees the photographs and feels warmth toward a child who seems real. What it is actually seeing underneath the warmth is the result of someone's very deliberate, very patient decision about what childhood is for. There is one more dimension of what Catherine is doing with Louis that deserves attention, and it is the dimension that is hardest to observe from outside. because it has no obvious public expression. It is the dimension of what she is teaching him about loss and resilience and the specific kind of difficulty that comes with a life that is permanently visible. Her own experience of illness, of stepping back from public life while dealing with something serious, of returning to it gradually and on her own terms, was itself a lesson demonstrated in real time. Not a lesson she chose to deliver at that particular moment, but a lesson nonetheless. Children watch how their parents handle difficulty more closely than they watch almost anything else, and what they see lodges in them in ways that are not always consciously processed, but that shape their sense of what is possible when things get hard. What Lewis saw in 2024, in whatever age-appropriate way his parents communicated it to him, was his mother dealing honestly with something difficult. He saw her absent when she needed to be absent, and present when she was able to be present. He saw, presumably, some version of what it looks like when a person who has always been the steady center of a family's daily life has to be taken care of rather than doing the taking care. He saw his parents managing that together, managing the children's experience of it with what appears from outside to have been considerable care and honesty. That is not a small thing for a 7-year-old to have witnessed, even in the protected version of it that his parents would have offered him. It is, in a way, the sharpest possible demonstration of the thing Catherine has been trying to show him all along, that the world has difficult things in it, and that what you do with those difficult things, how you hold them and move through them and come out the other side, is what matters. She came out the other side. She's there for him now, in the garden and at the school run, and in whatever ordinary Tuesday afternoon things constitute the texture of his current life. The illness is in the past, the treatment is done, and the person who went through it is still, recognizably, the person he has always known. That continuity is itself a lesson. Not a lesson any parent would choose to teach this way, but one that was taught, and one that Louis carries now, whether or not he has the words for it yet. He is growing up. He will keep growing. And the person he becomes will be, in more ways than can be counted from outside, the product of what she has given him in these early years. The garden, the ordinary afternoons, the photographs that feel real because they are, and the mother who decided before he was born that his childhood was going to belong to him. That was the lesson. That is what she is still teaching.